The laughter cut through the humid morning air like a blade, harsh, mocking, unrestrained. A cluster of young recruits doubled over near the hangar doors, pointing at the lone figure who stood, her posture stiff but unyielding, her hands tightening around the strap of her flight bag. Eagle-7. One of them sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. More like Pigeon-Seven. Watch her flap her wings. Their voices carried, echoing against the steel ribs of the airbase, filling the silence that others were too cautious to break. Some turned their eyes away, unwilling to intervene. Some smirked faintly, complicit by inaction, and some, those who knew better, lowered their heads, ashamed, but not brave enough to speak. Only she stood motionless, her face calm, her silence sharper than any retort. Lieutenant Rivera, the woman whose call sign they mocked, the woman whose history none of them dared ask about. And then, from the control tower, a voice broke in, clipped, urgent, undeniable. Eagle-7, your go for launch. Repeat. Eagle-7, cleared for immediate launch. The recruits froze. The laughter choked in their throats. In that instant, the ground shifted beneath them, though they could not yet understand why. Rivera had long grown accustomed to silence, as both shield and burden. She knew the sting of being underestimated, the sting of whispers left to hang in the air unchallenged. She bore them not because she was incapable of response, but because she had learned, through fire and loss, that silence often roared louder than any voice. Her call sign Eagle-7 was not a gift, nor an honor freely given. It was earned, carved into her soul through nights of fire and smoke, through skies lit with tracer rounds, through the piercing smell of jet fuel mingled with blood. To her, it was not a nickname. It was a grave marker, a memory, a vow. Years earlier, on a desert deployment far from home, she had flown as part of a seven-bird squadron, Eagle Flight. She was the youngest, the least experienced, and yet, when the firestorm came, it was her voice that cut through the chaos. 6 aircraft went down in one mission, 6 friends, 6 comrades, 6 pieces of her heart torn away in the span of 30 harrowing minutes. She alone returned. When she landed, her aircraft riddled with holes, smoke curling from the fuselage. The tower had whispered the words that still burned in her memory. Eagle-7, you're all that's left. She did not choose the name. She accepted it, because it meant carrying 6 souls with her, every time she stepped into the cockpit. But stories fade. Medals tarnish. Glory is devoured by the next generation's hunger to prove themselves. Rivera's silence and solitary habits made her an easy target. The recruits saw only a woman past her prime, someone clinging to a call sign they thought was more myth than merit. When she passed, they muttered. When she stood in line, they smirked. And when her name lit up the flight roster, they laughed. She bore it all, head high, her silence a fortress. But silence does not erase injustice, it magnifies it. Each mockery was a stone piled upon her shoulders. Each jeer was a reminder of how quickly the living forgot the price paid by the dead. And yet, there were whispers among the seasoned officers, those who knew the history of Eagle Flight, those who still remembered the night 6 fell and 1 remained. They said Rivera carried something unseen, something that could not be mocked into submission. On that particular morning, the recruits' jeering was louder than usual. They gathered like a pack, voices sharp, their bravado swelling in the safety of numbers. Rivera had just checked her gear, her fingers brushing over the worn fabric of her gloves, when the taunts came. "Hey, Eagle-7, why don't you tell us another fairy tale about your glory days?" Careful, she might start crying like the rest of her squadron. The words landed like daggers, but Rivera did not flinch. Not even when the laughter rose around her, bouncing off steel and concrete. Her jaw tightened, but her eyes remained fixed on the horizon. Somewhere deep inside, she remembered the heat of burning skies, the last cries of her comrades on the radio, the silence that followed. And then the tower spoke. The clipped, Authoritative voice cut through the airbase like a siren of truth. Eagle-7, your go for launch. At once, the atmosphere shifted. The recruits froze, their grins faltering. A few blinked in disbelief, their words suddenly hollow, stripped of weight. The officers who had remained silent straightened, as if a long-forgotten truth had just been declared aloud. For Rivera, the words were more than clearance. They were recognition, a summoning, an echo of the night when her world burned, and she alone returned. Slowly, she turned, her boots grinding against the tarmac. Every step carried a gravity the recruits could not yet comprehend. She approached her jet with deliberate calm, her flight bag slung across her shoulder, her silence now a roar the entire base could hear. One by one, the recruits' smirks faded, replaced by unease. They had mocked the name, but now they were confronted with the truth. The tower, the authority they answered to, had spoken her call sign with reverence. The mockery crumbled in the face of reality. Eagle-7 was not a joke. She was the embodiment of sacrifice, the last sentinel of a fallen squadron, the one who had carried the weight of 6 lives through fire. And she was still here. As Rivera adjusted her gloves and placed her helmet beneath her arm, she finally spoke, not to the recruits, not to the crowd, but to herself, to the ghost who still flew with her. Every launch, I carry you with me. Her voice was steady, quiet, but those near her heard it, and it lodged in their chests like a stone. Then, after a long pause, she turned her gaze toward the recruits. Calm, unshaken. You can laugh at me, but never laugh at the dead. Their silence is why you're alive to speak. The words hung heavy, undeniable. No one dared respond. When the engines roared to life, the recruits instinctively stepped back, the sheer power vibrating through the ground. Rivera climbed into the cockpit with the ease of ritual, her movements fluid, practiced, sacred. As the canopy sealed shut, the control tower repeated the words. Eagle-7, you are go for launch. The jet thundered down the runway, rising into the sky with the grace of memory and the force of unbreakable will. Those who had laughed stood silent now, their smirks erased, their hearts pounding with something unfamiliar respect. And when Rivera disappeared into the sky, the recruits could no longer meet each other's eyes. They understood, finally, that they had witnessed not just a flight, but the vindication of honor. Back on the tarmac, the silence was heavy. Officers exchanged glances that said everything words could not. The recruits stood chastened, their arrogance pierced. Somewhere above, Rivera flew not just for herself, but for 6 others who would never fly again. The tower's words echoed in every heart that had heard them. Eagle-7, your go for launch. It was not just clearance. It was a benediction, a reminder, a declaration that sacrifice lives on, even in silence. Respect is not demanded, it is earned, often in silence, often in shadows where the world does not look. Lieutenant Rivera carried the weight of 6 fallen comrades, mocked by those too young to understand, vindicated by the voice of truth from the tower. This is the lesson of Eagle-7. Dignity does not shout, it endures. Wherever you're watching from, remember this. Never mock what you do not understand, for behind a name may lie sacrifice you could never bear. What do you think of Rivera's story? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where in the world you're watching from. If her story moved you, subscribe for more stories that honor the silent heroes among us. Because sometimes, silence is the loudest voice of all.